I'm really excited to be chairing the launch of Al's exciting book, My Secret EdTech Diary, and also the panel discussions taking place, where we're going to be looking at the positive role of EdTech in a new landscape, sharing experiences and ideas along the way. So before we go into the discussions, let me introduce our panel. So we have from New York, Derek Newton. He is an education writer and contributor at Forbes with bylines in USA Today, Washington Post and others. We have Linda Parsons joining us from Dubai, education technology lead at Dera International School. We have Caroline Wright, General Director General of the BESA, British Educational Suppliers Association. Stephen Hope, CEO of Sea Learning and Director of EduFuturists. And lastly, the great man himself, Al Kingsley, Chair of 2 multi-academy trusts and CEO at NetSupport. So, with the recent events we've experienced for the past 18 months, they have actually highlighted the crucial role of EdTech with educators in all facets in terms of ensuring the continuity of learning with regards to remote learning, assessments, even with regards to mental health and well-being. So Al, I will pose the first question to you. You've just written a book about EdTech. What made you decide to write a book about it?
That's a very good question. And I have to be honest that when people ask me, my first reflection was, I can't remember the moment where I thought I better write a book. But I suppose the thing that is overarching for me, I often talk about it, is that the education space is different to many other sectors by the nature of people are so willing to share and offer support. And I think in the spirit of that, I often refer to myself as an edu sponge, which means, lots of the things that I share, I quite openly accept the things that I've learned and acquired from others. It kind of comes full circle at some point where you feel like I kind of have an obligation to share that information back out. Although I look clearly very youthful, I've also reached the point where any longer and I might start forgetting the important bits as well. So it seems good timing on all fronts. But I do think there's another bigger point, which is for the right reasons, it's been an amplifier the last couple of years, and lots of people have been talking about the role of EdTech. And with all the positives also comes lots of questions, the pitfalls, the risks, and so on. But the thing that struck me most of all was a lot of people quite intimidated by the EdTech name and educational technology. And somehow the tech bit puts it in a box where it's only for those where IT and computing is their strength. And actually, if we think about what EdTech's there to do, facilitate great teaching and learning and comms and well-being and all the facets we want to do, freeing up time, it's actually the domain of everybody. So the real driver, I suppose, getting into the book was then not making it a technical journal, but actually writing it in a way that anybody could read. And again, not being both foolish and arrogant and say the book's full of all the answers, but actually direct to the kind of the questions and the people that know stuff and the pitfalls that I've fallen into or I have working with other schools, and really trying to short circuit things and put everything in one place. So that's really the kind of driver for it.
Thank you so much. And I totally agree. I just hold up my cheeky copy here, but it is highly accessible and I keep cherry picking. There's just so much in there. So thank you so much, Al, for introducing the discussion. Caroline, if I just ask you, do you agree with Al's sentiments about the positive role in EdTech? How have your BESA members adapted to the changing circumstances?
Thank you. And yes, Mark just said I've got a nice mug. It is a very nice mug. One of my new editions, very proud of that. Yeah, well, the bit of the book that I absolutely love, it's Al's quote where he says, I think you say, EdTech can be the jam in the learning sandwich. And for me, that just sums it up perfectly. EdTech in the hands of a great teacher can just turbocharge that whole sort of teaching and learning experience. It can, on the one hand, save the teacher time in terms of workload, helping support the parts of the job that actually you don't want to spend very much time on. You'd rather focus on something else that really enhances the learning experience. It adds to the the learner experience in a whole range of ways. And just that part about the jam, I think it's just, you know, EdTech, I would say, should never just be used alone. It's part of kind of with a teacher, it's part of a blend. It's kind of one of a number of strategies that really build together to make it sort of, well, like I say, turbocharging the whole experience. So really agree with Al on kind of positive role of EdTech. In terms of the changing situation of the last year, I mean, I just take my hat off to EdTech companies, and in particular, the BESA members that I work with. That's more than 450 companies based in the UK. I mean, they just saw COVID firsthand. Obviously, they don't just work with schools in the UK. That's a fantastic thing, but they work with schools across the world. So they were seeing COVID as it had its impact on closing schools, starting off in Asia, then tracking back over the Middle East and so on before it reached Europe and the UK. And they were able to really quickly, in their sort of hands-on role supporting schools in those regions, be identifying it over that sort of 6 to 8 weeks period before we went into lockdown in the UK, some of the things that were working well and less well, like sort of Al says, you know, actually, what might you want to consider as part of your sort of lockdown strategy? What do you really need to address? So they were able to be hands-on in terms of being at the end of the phone and providing schools support as they went into the initial lockdown. Then over that period of just the first 3 months of lockdown alone, the BESA companies I work with that actually provided more than £36 million of resources and support free of charge to schools across the world. And I think, you know, EdTech is a growing sector, but it's certainly not sort of up there in terms of huge amounts of revenue. So to you know, do the right thing in that sense of actually kind of realizing it's a national crisis, really kind of supporting the sector in that way, I think was hugely impressive. And now as we're moving into different places around the world and into the kind of more COVID recovery, actually, how do you get back into supporting students in school as well as any catch up that might be needed or lost learning? We're now seeing our suppliers actually taking part in those sort of conversations with schools on how to help them develop their plans for their schools. So I think there's a lot sort of that's been going on by them, and I think they're now adapting. It's going to be a continual thing. I think we're going to be adapting for a long while, but some of the trends we've seen over the last year that have actually worked really, really well for schools. You know, we've all heard about the kind of the parents' evenings moving online and are probably going to stay that way. There are similar things in the sense that we've carried out surveys with schools who say actually it saves time to meet suppliers online rather than and it's potentially safer rather than having physical visits to school. So adapting to that new way of actually, if you're a hands-on EdTech product, you've got kit, how do you showcase that sort of to schools so they see the benefits of it and so on? So they're having to adapt as we move along too. But yeah, lots of pivoting and juggling, I would say.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for a comprehensive response. I mean, I have to start off and say, you know, someone who still works in a school, hats off to the companies for actually just stepping in when we had a national crisis and helping, and, you know, and it's just phenomenal. And, you know, the amount of money you said that was actually providing the support, that says a lot. So thank you for that. Al, I'll come back to you. There's a chapter in your book about EdTech from a vendor's perspective. What is the main driver for that section?
Well, I suppose if I was being really honest, I could probably start by saying it's one I've got quite a lot of personal experience in. But the bigger driver was, again, if we think about the EdTech conversation, I think it's always about the more you're informed, the better you understand the bigger picture, or as I like to say, through a wider lens, the better placed you are to make decisions. And one of the strands we've seen as a result, you know, and I'm a huge fan of what BESA have been doing, supporting the sector and continuing to advocate, you know, vendors and being that connector in the space. But one of the things I think is really important is that successful products, there are different elements that make up good products. And one of those, absolutely, I'm a big advocate for is co-production. And as we've seen by the cornucopia of choices that have been available to many schools, we also want to make sure schools are making the right choices. So there's one part of that section was really about, well, if I'm in a school as a teacher, as an IT professional, actually understanding the thought process that vendors need to go through to create, evolve and maintain products. what the cost implications are, what the strategic implications are, but also understanding where some products can be quite sticky. So you're buying into an ecosystem. So thinking longer term, is my data going to be transferable if there's different solutions in 12 months' time? That information and knowledge forearms you to ask more pressing and the right questions when you're engaging with vendors. But equally, through all the different activities that I know all of you do as well, where we try and provide a voice for teachers who are looking to put a foot into the commercial world and have ideas of solutions or services that might be beneficial to their peers, I also wanted to make it kind of a bit of a checklist for anybody who was thinking about starting their own product or solution. What were the things to think of? What are the kind of the checklists to work through? And I've got plenty of pitfalls that I've tripped up in over the last 30 years that I was happy to share. So it's really about looking at the vendor from both wanting to be one or currently are one, and also understanding it so that schools are forearmed to ask the more telling questions.
Thank you so much. And it chimes in with something that Caroline shared earlier about the idea now of co-production. What's really exciting is the fact that you have conversations taking place between the edtech companies and the schools, looking at creating solutions that works for them. So, and it's really exciting to actually see that. Caroline, I'll go back to you. Have you seen trends? Have you seen the trends Al is referring to in terms of co-production and evidence-based products becoming more prevalent? And I know you did touch upon it before, but have you seen any?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think co-production is something that I think good product quality providers have been doing for a while. And I think sometimes, actually, it's a bit of a plea to schools. There's a lot of talk about sort of by teachers for teachers, in the sense of it's made by teachers and offered by teachers, but actually the vast majority of really high quality kind of commercial edtech providers will be working with teachers. I'd say very, very, very rarely will there not be a teacher involved in the production of a really high quality kind of a curriculum resource. So, you know, it makes absolute sense to be making something that teachers want. So get a teacher's insight, get the experts involved. So I'd really agree with Anne on that, and I wouldn't expect that to I hope it won't stop, because there should always be more of it. I think the challenge is it's the timescales and finding teachers who, clearly very, very pressurized work environments and so on, giving teachers the space, because it can also be really beneficial for them too, feeding into that process. So co-production, definitely. And I think the thing that is going to get more and more prevalent is definitely this point about evidence-based products. Yes. I'm very proud that BEAS has been working with its a project called Educate, which is sort of the brainchild of Professor Rose Luckin from UCL, University College London, that secured European Regional Development Fund funding, even though we're not in Europe anymore, to help provide training in carrying out education efficacy and research on the impact of edtech products and services. And it's already sort of had the first round where I think a couple of hundred edtech startups went through the program, and they've secured funding for a second round, and it's an entirely free program that edtech companies can take part in. And I think it's so valuable that companies are able to show and prove and test the impact of their products, because we all know schools have very limited budgets, and it's really important that they can assess what they're spending their limited finance on to know it's going to be working in their own settings. So I think that's really important. And just from a personal point of view, I would absolutely hate us to ever be in the same situation again, where we saw the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Prime Minister sort of turn down if I don't know, I wasn't in the room, so I don't know whether to believe the media reports or not, but to decline this sort of education recovery plan that Sir Kevin set out, claiming that there wasn't enough sort of education evidence for it. Now, that wasn't to do necessarily with our edtech community, but I really want us as a community to be able to take it to the powers that be, saying that we know this works, fund it, it will have a positive impact both on teachers and students. So that's kind of why I think that's really important.
Thank you very much. A arousing key message there, Caroline. Thank you so much. Derek, if I can bring you into the conversation, what key trends and EdTech changes have you come across within the past year? Has COVID been an accelerator for EdTech from what you've seen?
Thank you. Great question. I will answer in 9 parts. No, I'm kidding.
I just thought, okay.
So here we go. No, I think I'm paying attention to 3 things. The first 2 are pretty easy. It feels like there's been an acceleration of acquisitions and mergers of companies in the EdTech space in the last 3 to 4 months. I don't know whether that's just delayed because people were separated and segmented, and now it's speeding up because now things are returning to a normal. We'll have to see. I'm paying attention to sort of the collective consumer response, if you will, from a lot of people sort of being forced to try EdTech products for the first time, both teachers and parents and students. That I think is going to be interesting to see how the public sort of takes that and what they learn from it and what their attitude and temperature is towards these products in the future. But probably more on point, what I'm really noticing is the success of EdTech products that are simple, that identify a very clear solution, that don't try to do too much, that don't require a lot of training, that don't require a lot of professional development, that have a very clear mission and people can pretty much figure out how to use on their own. I think those products make a whole lot of sense just logically, and I really see them capturing the marketplace, doing very well very quickly in this sort of pandemic and post-pandemic space. And I don't have any reason to think that will stop. I think it's something Al wrote, that I read recently. Less is more, right now. People with products that are narrow and focused and easy are going to win, and I think they're going to win big. So that's a trend that I'm looking at. I think we have a lot of products in the market already that are big and complicated and comprehensive and have 17 updates and require hours of training. And I just don't know that the appetite is there now for those on any side of the equation. And I don't know how long it'll be until the appetite comes back, if it does. So long answer, but I'm looking at mergers and acquisitions in the space, consumer feedback to the products that they've all had to figure out pretty quickly, and this trend that narrow and agile and easy is the path to winning.
Thank you so much, Derek. And I liked the second point you raised about consumer feedback and the fact that now one of the great things is the fact that we obviously had parents, carers and families involved in the utilization of EdTech. So getting their insights now moving forward will equally be important.
Yeah, and Bucky, on that really quickly, I think that's a good thing and a bad thing. I think, well, not necessarily bad, but I think that cuts both ways. I think we've all seen criticisms and complaints arise from people. The good news is we know that now and it can be fixed. We've also seen some people who are taking the EdTech and the process very seriously and engaging and using it. People that we never would have reached before. Well, never is too strong, but people who are now engaged in the conversation that we wouldn't have gotten for a long time. Sorry to interrupt that. No
problem at all. Yeah, good point. And because they can see the impact. And I think that's one of the great things, and I know you referenced this in your book, Al, about the fact that COVID brought about an acceleration with regards to EdTech that was taking a long time coming. And I think for some people, experiencing it and seeing the impact is what they needed to see to get them on board. So Al's book, your book, Al, contains a section about planning and moving forward your EdTech strategy, which I was really excited to see, particularly as it covered a number of points, including staff and student digital skills. And I'm always one for about skills because it's transferable beyond the school, work-life balance, and as you touched upon before, asking the right questions. Linda, if I can bring you into the conversation, I know you provided some insights in the book. Can you tell us about the planning that you undertook for your school's future of EdTech to maximize impact, please?
Hi, Becky. Thank you very much for the question. I'm delighted to be here as well. Like it's really it's amazing to have this book right next to me. It's real. It's great. Maximizing impact and making sure that you're schools and you're kind of like, I guess, like the academy, like if you're part of like a wider trust that moves forward, it must always go, and this is like such a cliche to say, but like it must always go straight back to the students. Is like what's the students actually learning, and to make sure those students, when they're learning those future skills, the skills that like we're using at the moment, in order to access like the world that we live in today. So when I talk about this to teachers, to parents, and to students, you always like you never talk about the platform. You always talk about kind of what the student is going to be able to get from it. So, for instance, if you're talking about Microsoft Teams, because we're like I've got one school that's I've recently changed jobs, so like I've got one school that's a Microsoft school. I've got one school that's a Google school. So let's take the Microsoft Teams school, for instance. Like you talk about Microsoft Teams, and you don't talk about it as just Microsoft Teams. Oh, it's a web conferencing app. You're talking about it as if to say, like, this is how you're going to collaborate with people that aren't in the building. This is how you're going to collaborate with people in the wider world, and so on. But how do you get those students to actually to actually use it in a safe way? So you have to start by looking at how your parents and how your teachers understand how each of the platforms work and why that platform is there in your school environment. So what is your digital ecosystem, and why is it relevant to everyone, and why should you train yourself in it? Because essentially you're going to be using it like every single day in every single lesson with your students, and you want to make sure that you're using it in a safe way so that you can role model that safe use to your students as well. Looking at like maximizing impact by using platforms, like we're maximizing impact by making sure that each of the platforms that we're using, it being Teams, Office 365, or Sentry, and so on, like you link it directly back to like how does it help things like retrieval practice? How does it help things like collaboration of ideas, collation of information? If you're using things like Flipgrid, if you're also using things, if you're kind of like trying to get like lots of different people's opinions, and this has become really, really prominent this year because, of course, like in our schools in Dubai, but also in America and also in the UK, like you're looking at a classroom that isn't just the children that are like right in front of you. So you're looking at a classroom that has children in from from home, but potentially why stop there? If like you've already got a hybrid classroom, like why not just open up your classroom to like the wider world so they can collate, they can collaborate, you can maximize that EdTech impact by showing them that actually you can learn from anywhere, and you can do this on a daily basis. So it's not a novel thing anymore. Back in the day we used to have Skype in the classroom, and it was almost like when you got the TV and you rolled the TV into the classroom like 25 years ago.
Yes, I remember that.
Anymore, and like every single day, not every single day, but like every single day, every single hour. Last year, of course, we were using EdTech, okay, but like maybe like weekly, like I was using YouTube, for instance, like in the classroom, because like using video now is not something that's supposed to be novel. Like we know that we can that has massive impact if it's used properly, like in the classroom. In the same way now we've got hybrid learning, maximizing the impact and showing that actually you can open your doors and showing good practice, like from the teacher's point of view. So like, for instance, when I am teaching teachers about this concept, right at the beginning of the year, like I would make our CPD to be worldwide. So I would open up on Flipgrid. I would get you guys to like talk to my teachers so that they can see on Padlet, for instance, that they can learn from the worldwide, it hopefully inspires them. So when they go into every single day into the classroom, like they would then, like if we have a STEAM day or a STEM day, if you have a STEM day or if you have like internet safe day or something, like you're more likely to open up that classroom briefly and safely, so that the children can learn from anyone in the wider world. So maximizing impact, always bring it to the students and always make sure that the teachers know that they can use it and empower them with those skills, so that even the doubters. I think the best person, like my best success story this year was actually one of my fellow science teachers who absolutely hated OneNote at the beginning of the year, and did not realise, did not see the impact, the actual impact of having a copybook, or replacing that copybook with OneNote, until he realised what he could do with OneNote. And it was multimodal, and he could put videos in it, and he could put audio in it, and he could do all of these things, and he could see the impact of that on students, and it's changed the way that he teaches forever. But he couldn't do that if you don't show it to him. And yeah, so sorry, I tend to ramble quite a lot when I get passionate about something. Like, you know, basically,
passion is good. Passion is good. That's okay, and it's EdTech. So I think you're amongst friends here, Linda. Thank you so much. I love the fact that you mentioned the first thing you said about planning for your school's future use of EdTech is sharing the why with the different stakeholders, sharing the why, actually looking at the impact you expect it to have on the young people that you actually teach, and being really clear at the purpose of the ways in which it was to, maybe to collaborate, etc. And I think that is really key. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Now, we've seen, obviously, that schools' use of EdTech has actually changed during the last 18 months. And what's great and exciting is the fact that more schools now are clearer about what works in terms of EdTech within their context and what doesn't work. So they can make informed decisions and have discussions about that. Steve, if I may bring you into the conversation, can you share your experiences with us on how schools and FE have been adapting using technology and the impact it's been having?
Yeah, thanks for the question and thanks for the invite. I think the first thing that resonated to what Linda said and yourself, Bucky, around the why. And I think a lot of schools have started to step up. Some of those people that like shiny things have started to think about right tool, right job. What is our why? What problems are we trying to solve, and what tools can we start to use to solve those problems on the big picture rather than just day to day? You see so many, don't you, where it's like, I think I might want to use this tool. What do you think you might use it for? I'm not sure. I've just seen somebody else use it, and it's that it can be a good thing because it inspires and it navigates and it motivates others to want to use it, but it's not always the best shape. Some of the best practice has been learned, and I think COVID and what's happened over the last 18 months has been great, because some people say that EdTech, blended learning and online learning, some people think it existed only since COVID and as a response to COVID. And actually the world existed for many, many years. If you look at some of the great work in the north of Scotland, look at the outback of Australia, they've been doing this on a regular basis, and some of those learnings and how those apply. And I think that's the context of taking it, I say magpie, not stealing, looking at some great ideas and then applying it to the context of your environment and the nest where you live is actually key as an organisation. I also hear this narrative that it can't be used in primary schools. I'm a chair of governors at a primary school, and this thing of EdTech doesn't work with early years and young children. And I'm like, okay, well, go in the environment and let's see what's going on. And some wonderful things with parental engagement around creating some stuff on a Google site or a website. These are the ideas what you could do from home or extend beyond the classroom and take away from the four walls of the building. Make a video, submit it on a Google form or a Microsoft form, and then let's share some ideas of what you've actually been doing. And that engagement with parental engagement has actually been absolutely wonderful. And I've seen some great stuff around creativity. Rather than just EdTech, how can we use EdTech to be more creative, to be critical thinkers, and to communicate and collaborate better? I saw a wonderful thing on social media where there was a task, and the teachers had allowed students to make the choice at the age of, I think it was 5. How do you want to present this information back? And then some children had got their parents, and one of the children was really stroppy, saying, "No, Dad, you're pointing the camera in the wrong way. You're not getting the best light." And they'd got them telling a story. And then some students were like, "I don't want to be on camera." So they were using Book Creator and Slice and loads of different things. And I was like, choice is absolutely great, because us times we pigeonhole and say you're going to do it in this way. And some of the best practices, actually, when we talk about stakeholders, getting the students to decide how they want to and what they want to use is key. Some of the other stuff around real transformation of learning. So rather than just let's use a Google Doc or a OneNote in place of a paper book, actually, how can we start to really think about, for apprenticeships particularly, healthcare, childcare, they're not going to be carrying around a laptop, so we can't always digitize things. Sometimes they struggle writing things down. So use a Flipgrid, to demonstrate competency in those frameworks around apprenticeships, to rather than this whole thing of endpoint assessments of I'm going to write exactly what I know, my subject knowledge. How can you demonstrate competency? How can you reflect? So you've got a diary and something you go back to for the staff, for you as an individual and your peers to start to learn on the practice that you're actually developing. I've seen some really nice stuff. But also the glue, I think, that we talk about learning. One of the things that we really lost when we went into lockdown is let's put everything on live lessons, and you're going to go to your lesson, then you're going to go to another lesson and another lesson. I remember when I was in school, it was a long time ago, but I do remember bits. And I used to love getting into school early and talking with mates what's going on. And there wasn't a lot because we couldn't leave our houses. But what about the glue around those little spaces around mental health? And I've heard people doing apologies for the Yorkshire accent, but a chatty cafe over in Burnley and the west of England around getting these spaces for staff to connect, staff and students to connect, share experiences, so they're not being disruptive at times in the classroom because they just want to connect with their peers that they didn't have an opportunity to do. And if I'm honest, that's one thing we have to reflect on: curriculum design around online and blended learning. Some great practice, but actually how can we shape it rather than just a teaching focus to be a learning and a whole approach to what school environment or a learning environment looks like, and the glue that goes with it. You mentioned parents' evening, you mentioned parental engagement, also the buy-in from teachers, the real process of actually the opportunity for personalised CPD. You're watching now live. If you can, great, but if you can't, book on. And you get a recording after, so you can watch it. If you've got children, you can pause it, you can reflect, you can go back. And I think the days of sheep dip approach, I'm a Yorkshireman, sheep dip means everybody gets exactly the same thing and the same day and the same way. Yeah, so this whole thing of, right, everybody gets exactly the same thing, and it's probably happening around the country because it's the last week of term. It's not bespoke and it's not personalised, and people are probably stepping up. And I think that's one of the things that we talk about, what we did before, that will hopefully be never done again. Bespoke, specific, personalised to the individuals, because teachers know what they want now, how they want it, and I think that will change forever. We'll stop talking. But the last thing I'll say is,
I have to say, so I love, this is what really excites me about hearing what happens within a classroom setting, whether it's from early years all the way to FE. It's just really exciting, Steve. I wish we could continue, but we're up against the time limit. So thank you so much for that. But what I summarized from what you said, sorry.
It's Derek. I just want to interrupt for 1 second. I know I'm throwing everything off again, but did I hear Steve correctly say he used to get to school early? I know.
Yeah.
I did, yeah, a long time ago. I don't get to work early. I don't. I'm the boss now, but yeah, school early, maybe not work early, but yeah, definitely school early.
Just wanted to be sure I heard that right. All right, sorry.
All right, okay. Is that some kind of in-joke or something? Because I'm not sure.
No, I don't know what that's like. I didn't have that experience at all.
Okay.
Anyway, I was just giving Steve some business. It's all right. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. That's all right, Derek. What I was going to say before I move on, I loved the choice aspect that you mentioned, the importance of connection, and actually looking at curriculum design as well with regards to EdTech and blended learning. So thank you so much. So choosing EdTech can be hard for schools, and that is the case from my experience, because there's just so much out there and you're not quite sure about what would work within your context. So Al, if I go back to you, in your book, you mentioned suggested questions schools and vendors should ask themselves. Can you please tell us a little bit more about this?
Well, I suppose the most important bit of feedback, and here's the shocker, is every school is different. And so there will be subtly different questions. And that's back to that prescriptive approach of we can't apply the same logic to everybody. It depends on where schools are at in their journey. But coming back to that kind of theme we talked about earlier, on one strand, there is that question of the why. Why do we want this solution? What are we going to use it for? Does it align with either our broader digital strategy or vision? And Linda talked in her work about digital vision leading into the digital strategy. And also, how are we going to measure impact? And I think this comes to this idea that if we cherry pick solutions without really thinking about the questions of how are we going to implement it, how are we going to embed it, how are we going to train our staff for it, is it going to be scalable, is it going to embed well, all those kind of things, is it going to be where possible platform agnostic, is it going to level the playing field in terms of our existing infrastructure and capacities? There's all sorts of other strands that kind of throw into it, but then it kind of knocks onto that sense of so how do I choose a good product? Do I look at a product? Do they offer me a trial that I can utilize? Can I compare outcomes or activities with students who are using perhaps a trial solution versus those that aren't? Is there, if it's a pedagogy-centric solution, is there any research-based evidence that can come with it in terms of the impact for it? There's the huge one that we all engage in actively, which is, what about that kind of peer feedback, the case studies, that peer support and, you know, and validation of how solutions have worked? And I think we're talking public money, we're talking about tight school funding, which we all know is a pressure is there. But the biggest thing of all is, it's time and confidence. The last thing you want to do is try new technology where you actually, it doesn't meet your expectations. It damages confidence in going out and trying something new again. And that precious commodity of time. You know, good technology, as well as having a wow impact in terms of the experience for young people, whether it's in terms of increasing outcomes or whether it's actually experiential in terms of getting them more engaged, should also, in a separate strand, there are loads of tools, we've talked about a few this evening, that are about saving teachers time, so they've got more time to do the stuff that they're good at, that person-to-person engagement. So I think there's a whole strand, and obviously I touch on lots of those questions in the book, but there's also questions that vendors need to ask. You know, there's that kind of mindset, and you know, I'm really proud of the fact, and it's not just the UK, but here in the UK, we've got a fantastic EdTech community. There are so many great vendors, big and small, trying to innovate and come up with solutions. And I suppose sometimes the questions might seem a little bit like, well, that's obvious, Al. But it's that sense, because of what we've seen the last 18 months, a solution that was fit for purpose and perfectly aligned 2 years ago might not still be. Yeah. And it's about, how do you have that constant feedback loop? You know, we start using the terminology that in a classroom, the teachers will go, well, that's our bread and butter. And it's like, well, actually, those kind of rules apply, which is, we need to be asking the right questions. Is this still the right way that you want to utilize the solution? Does it create more barriers than benefits? Is it integrating with the other solutions that you're using now? And how do we constantly refine the solution to make it fit for purpose? You know, and Derek made a really, really salient point there, which is sometimes there's an assumption that, you know, the more bells, the more whistles, the better the solution. You know, it's the kind of adage of the more buttons on the dashboard of your car make it a better car, right? Well, no, not necessarily, because the most important thing is how easy is it to get in and drive. And actually confidence and accessibility potentially makes the solution something that a broader cohort of staff and students will engage with. And if you use something regularly, confidence builds and it becomes embedded, which is kind of full circle back on where we started. So I think I've tried to kind of pitch questions about, to kind of reset from vendors to be thinking about constantly, how do we keep doing that litmus test of, are we on the right point? And then obviously for schools for buying. I wanted to come back on the point that Stephen made, because it really resonated with me. One of the schools in our trust is an infant school, and we converted an old coach that's for our learning journeys, and it has our learning journeys on the side. So our cohort are 4 to 7 in that bus, and they engage in all sorts of activities, including augmented and virtual reality and just experiences. Now, and I argue, you know, when we think of EdTech, again, it's really easy to get focused on certain particular categories of tools, but actually just something that makes kids, young children, go wow and giggle and get excited, that is the catalyst that go away and start to encourage them to do some creative writing. Or if they feel like they're in a certain space or a world, it triggers the imagination, the role play, the interaction, the dialogue. Those kind of things to me are priceless. And I often see that kind of debate in schools, particularly if you've got the pre and secondary, about, well, everything we do can't be experiential. It's got to have impact in terms of progress and outcomes. And of course, that's true, but I don't like the everything word, because actually sometimes I reflect back on the things, and my fondest memories of my time at school were the trips and the activities and the events. And they're the things that gave me a love of going to school every day and being as part of that community. So it's about finding that kind of balance between the two.
Thank you so much, Al. Thank you for that. So, a question I'm going to pose to everyone, but starting with Linda. Al's book has a section named Voices Aligned, which shares the views from trusted sources like yourselves. As we have you here, what priorities do you see moving forward? And I say, Linda, would you like to respond to that question first, please?
Yes, thank you. Let me just give like a quick thing, because there are so many things which have come out of this year in particular. Mm-hmm. The priority, okay, so I'm going to give you a bit of context. Like, so when we went back to school, our school is about 18 years old, and we went into hybrid learning, and we found that this year we've gone leaps and bounds in like developing our digital strategy, and developing the impact of that digital strategy onto parents, onto teachers, and onto students. But the thing that like is our priority at the moment is upgrading our hardware systems, just because like we're finding limitations, and those limitations now is not our imagination or the teacher's resilience, or like, you know, the teacher's ability to adapt. It's the older hardware that we have, like the wires and the cables, and the fact that we've got certain smart TVs and stuff which just aren't up to spec to what we want to do. So I think our priority at the moment is making sure that our digital environment in the classroom aligns with the vision that our teachers have on what they want to do with our students, and what our students need in order to access their learning, and the learning that's in our digital ecosystem. Because of course, if we're getting so we're fortunate enough to have the students coming in with their own devices, their personal devices. So we have a device agnostic environment. So basically, we even though we're Microsoft and Google, we Google in the other school, our students and our families love Apple. So therefore, they will never take away that, like, you know, we can't like say to them like, look, you got to put down the iPad, because like it's not fair on them. It's not fair on how they want to learn. So they're bringing in like these devices, but we need to make sure that we can safely connect them up onto our systems in order for them to do the augmented reality, virtual reality, and all that kind of stuff that we want them to do. So that is, I guess, the priority moving forward. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yep, and thanks for getting the ball rolling. Steve, if I pose the same question to you, what priorities do you see moving forward?
For me, the world, the universe, it's a tough one. I think straight away, I think in education specifically, I think we need to stop competing. I think we are now seeing the breakdown of silos from classroom, staff room to staff room, and beyond, the sharing of resources, not in reinventing the wheel. And this whole competitive nature, in particular England and the UK, of competing against ourselves. Is it the fact that we are now more likely to share, collaborate with others because we've removed league tables? I'm really interested to see whether that has been a causal effect, or actually we just started doing it because we're bored and we're trying to find other people to talk to, beyond the fact that we're in lockdown in our house. But I think let's not compete. We're not football teams trying to win the league. Our whole result and the impact should be the benefit of the learners and the organisations that we serve, and we need to just stop competing. Why is it that one person creates a blended learning strategy right in the school or the college right next to you, but you're then sitting there thinking you've got to create your own? Why is it we're not sharing and doing the foundations, to the building blocks to make England the UK, apologies, New York and Dubai, but why is it that we're not trying to make the UK the strongest market and the best market out there? I've said no competition, but I'm talking about it now. I think success, keep celebrating the success. Let's tackle the debate of, and let's remove the debate of skills versus knowledge and trads versus futurists and all this. Let's just get over it, and let's just, you can have both views. Let's not create this divide, and let's just tackle it and just come together to see actually that there can be both views, and let's push it forward. And the final thing is probably just positivity, and personal network is so important. Sorry, my daughter's kicking off. I don't know if you can hear that, but she's yeah, I'm glad I'm not in there. But build a diverse network in terms of a learning network. Do you know, if you are one product and you disagree with another, go to that network, find out what's going on. If you disagree with something, build a diverse network of people that don't always agree with what you're saying, because sometimes it can be an echo chamber, and you always get people nodding when you're in the echo chamber because they agree with you. Let's try and tackle that and see why those people who don't use EdTech don't use it. How can we improve that? Because we will never know what the views are if we don't challenge it and have conversations.
Great point to end on. Very valid point to end on, Steve. Thank you. And I hope your daughter's okay as well. Okay, so moving on to Derek with the same question. What priorities do you see moving forward?
Well, now that Steve has said that, I can't agree with him. So we'll be in an echo chamber. No, I think something else that was said earlier, and I can't remember exactly who said it. I think EdTech generally in this stress moment of COVID has done a very good job of replicating or replacing the learning experience that many people found in their classrooms. Maybe not exactly the same, but has done on balance a good job, and in some places an exceptional job. But one of the places that it hasn't been able yet to get to are, and I forget who it was that said it, again, I apologize, these informal spaces in learning, the places that are less structured and more social and more free flowing, I think is a priority that I am anxious to see some good innovation tackle. And I also think in the, maybe not the upper levels, but certainly the mid level of what we have here, K-12 and below, solutions that engage parents in the EdTech process in more than just a supervisory, I want to see what my kids' grades and attendance looks like, more than just a watchful eye, but it's find a way to engage parents in maybe a collective learning process or as tutors of other students, something that is collaborative in a way that pulls parents into the learning, but also into the technology. I think that's going to be in the long term very, very important that we talk about students having a comfort level using it. We definitely know educators and instructors need to have a comfort level. I think parents have just as high a bar to understand what's being done and why and how it works and use it in a proactive way. So those are the two things for me, the informal learning areas and engaging parents.
Thank you, Derek. Yeah, that key, I think, yeah, about engaging parents, so valid. Al, what do you see as the priorities moving forward?
No, I've got nothing, Bucky. Oh, actually, I have. I've got a few. I suppose that the one that resonates most with me, and there is a strand to technology, is when we talk about, recent months particularly, and we've talked about our students and staff back in schools in the more traditional sense. We often use the term that I'm not a fan of, the catch-up term or the lost learning, which is a very negative term to use to young people. But one of the things is, if we talk about how do we implement improvement and access to children getting the opportunity to start accelerating their learning again, for want of a better term, actually one of the key building blocks is around well-being. And I see outside of the classroom and sort of inside the classroom that there's just as much a discussion about the use and effective use of technology to have a positive impact on well-being. And a lot of that comes down to time. Linda has alluded to it in terms of Teams channels and back channels, and Steve mentioned it in terms of, we're breaking down the siloed working, and that can be sharing resources, and that sharing is a positive way to often support. But actually the word support behind that is also really important. And I'd argue, given what we've gone through the last 18 months, you can't build on a foundation unless you've got a workforce and young people that are in a position to perform at their optimum. And so whilst we obviously need to look at tools that can have a positive impact in a child's journey through school, I think we also need to be looking at how we can reduce down workload, optimize workload, develop relationships, or better relationships with families, which are pivotal, particularly for our younger learners, to their development, community cohesion. We know now, schools, teachers are educators, social workers, health professionals. The remit suddenly grows on a day-by-day basis. But I think we have seen that actually in our efforts, because what's been forced upon us, we have actually seen those kind of shoots of fresh ideas and innovation where we're actually connecting in a more positive and a stronger way, particularly with our hard-to-reach families and our broader communities. So I'd kind of like to see, rather than the well-being being, well, we did send around the email, that reminded everybody of where they could go and read a newsletter, that we actually build that in a more tangible way into let's make sure that's actually a priority, so that then when we start trying to look at other things to introduce, people actually have the capacity and resilience to actually act on it and develop it.
Very true. I'm mindful of echo chamber, but I wholeheartedly agree. So thank you so much for that. And Caroline, if I end with you with regards to this question, where do you see the priorities moving forward?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm I'm scribbling things down. I was striking them out as everybody else was sort of. So yeah, I do agree. So sorry, but yeah, I do agree with lots of what everybody was saying. I suppose three key things, and Linda mentioned it. It's that infrastructure, and that's So that's a priority. Different countries, different systems have been making some investments sort of, in an emergency capacity, but actually just looking at that in detail, but not just the sort of the kit infrastructure, about sort of the infrastructure, our teacher infrastructure and CPD and training for kind of existing teachers, but also that sort of initial teacher training in EdTech, not just assuming that because someone's youngish, kind of they'll get it. Kind of actually, how do you use technology in an educational setting? So again, for me, sort of very much the infrastructure, innovation. I think one of the things you do see in any kind of crisis is people innovate out of an emergency and out of a crisis. So sort of innovation in terms of the industry, really. And I think we're seeing lots of exciting new services and new developments, and I think we'll continue to see that over the next initial period. And then I kind of think finally sort of that inclusion point, COVID it's impacted the poorest the hardest. We're seeing that with the whole vaccination debate. We're seeing it kind of with the kids who were out of school and the communities they were from. So kind of anything, for me, the most important point is that kind of inclusion and making sure that we can help those who need it most. And that sort of also in that inclusion, again, just building, I think Stevie said it, that kind of that collaboration and lack of competition. I'll tell you what, the nicest ever induction I ever had to a job, this might not go down very well with some teacher audience here, but actually was I used to work with Ofsted, not anymore, promise. But when I started work at Ofsted, it was just the best induction because they're all ex-teachers and they took me under their wing and they were explaining things. So I think teachers are, you do want to share knowledge, you do want to help kind of people. And I think kind of making that easier for schools and also with industry. So that's sort of inclusion and collaboration, I think, my sort of three most important points.
Thank you so much, Caroline. And I think we'll just allow you to get away with that mention of Ofsted within the context that you actually shared. Thank you. Okay, so Al's book has a section on top of his top 10s from podcasts, trade shows, books, and more. Fantastic, I have to say. It's really exciting to read. What would be your go-to places to develop your EdTech knowledge? So I start with Caroline, if I start with you.
Okay, where would I go? So yes, and there, I think trade shows wherever you are around the world. So in Dubai, there's the sort of amazing Guess event, kind of we have BET in the UK, there's the ISTE conference in America. So lots of good sort of EdTech places where you meet other peers. So there gives you that kind of, there are lots of other teachers with good ideas there, as well as kind of the vendors being able to share. I've got to do a little bit of, I haven't done it yet, so let me give a bit of a plug to kind of BISA's LendEd and LearnEd platform. So LendEd is actually a portal where BISA members put details of their products, but they don't do it in a kind of a marketing kind of 8 out of 10 cats like this kind of product type of thing. It's actually peer reviews of products and how it's worked in a particular school. And there's also a point where you can take a free trial of a product out. So kind of the LendEd platform, and for the industry, there's the EdTech Exchange, which is kind of a networking group where you can share ideas and meet other EdTech companies. And I think the EdTech Demonstrator Programme as well. I think kind of lots and lots of good practice coming out of there. And thank you, Martin. Martin's also plugged something we work on, the LearnEd roadshows, which are a bit like LendEd, but actually they're physical embodiments of where we get panels of expert teachers to talk about their experiences and including what hasn't worked. So what's worked well, what hasn't worked, and what would you talk about? So that would be mine.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for starting us off with that. Al, would you like to add?
I could add so many. Obviously, I don't want to mention specifics in my top 10 list. You'll have to discover those for your own. I absolutely put a tick in the box that the BET, ISTE, Jess, and others. I like them partly because you discover great stuff. There's good CPD there, but actually it's the human-to-human interaction, and that's where many of us have our relationships and friendships forged. I think the last 18 months has shown us, alongside the physical events and the road shows, which work really, really well, it's the world, it's the digital community now. I think that the PLN of having on Twitter is a fantastic place. I'm a fan, albeit I would hold myself as being a novice compared to many, but I love podcasts. There are so many great podcasts and resources online that mean you can access information when you're in the car, on the train, just moving about. That I think is a really good way to access that. I'm a huge fan of the work that Edufuturists do, Steve and the team, and we've tried to be involved with sport on that. But I mean, again, that's where you get like-minded peers. You get to see inspiring people that have put stuff into practice. And for me, that, you know, is always a kind of a great motivator of things to look at. So I think there's a really, really broad side of that, you know, and again, I'm agnostic in terms of the platforms, but we are spoiled for choices, and it's really about recognizing the fact that if you're stuck, there's always somebody within a couple of clicks who will point you in the right direction and share ideas with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Al. Derek.
Sorry, I thought my space bar would work to unmute, but apparently not. My go-to resource right now, actually, there's this great new book out. You might have heard of it, called My Secret Edtech Diary, I think is the name of it. That's really the place to get your information that's true. And then my other thing just simply is Twitter. There it is. My thing is just Twitter. Maybe that makes me a bad person, but I use it a lot because it allows me to find people with interesting voices and people whose opinions and I respect and who seem to be plugged in. And so you can follow them, and then in a couple of clicks, a couple of times a day, see what they're sharing and talking about. And then if you want to go to their source material, you can get it and read it. So to me, that's just an effective, efficient way to do it. And that's probably my primary resource.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Steve, where's your go-to?
Well, I'm going to be biased. I don't know what a wonderful podcast the Edufuturist is. No, there's so many, and I think I saw a stat. I don't know if it's true. 1 in 2 people has a podcast. Don't make me feel as good anymore, but I don't know whether that's true or not. But I was like, it's too many. There's lots of things. I think social media. Go on there, use hashtags, find people, look at who they're following, and start to develop that. It's great. There's a lot of negativity out there, but there is. In the world, I think it just replicates and just brings it to the forefront. Edtech Summit, it's quite a new one. I think there's a face-to-face one in November. It's a spin-off of the Schools and Academies show, I think.
Yeah.
Bet, DigiFest, all of those kind of things are absolutely wonderful. Those little pockets and the bits of glue outside of presentations where you can have a conversation on a coffee with somebody. But outside of your PLN, what about your local school? What about your competitor, as we're always seeing? So when everything goes back to normal and you can just have a coffee and think, right, we're trying this. They might be Microsoft, they might be Google, it might be Apple. Who cares? Okay, it's not about that. Okay, but they know the context of your students because they're taking from the same demographic as you are. What works and what is applied to the context of those learners might not work, but that'd be really nice, wouldn't it? That if actually schools, in terms of their outstanding grade for Ofsted, have to share and demonstrate and be part of the demonstrator school to show and share best practice about what they're doing. Imagine that as an outcome or something that's how they're held to account, because we love to do that, don't we? Or part of everybody's mission in terms of a school would be 1 day a week or 1 day a month. We allow the cross-pollination of ideas across the schools in your local area to start to meet over a coffee, a bit of cake, and just discuss what's going on, what's working, what isn't, but in a safe environment where people aren't going to be shut down because actually, you know what, I've never tried it. Okay, that's fine too. Everybody has to start somewhere, and today is the best day to start. So I think that's a great. Just let's be positive. Let's get it out there, and let's just share in a very different way to what we have been doing, and more of it is my view.
Thank you, Steve. And I love the fact that it's, again, breaking down the idea of competition. You know, they're our students at the end of the day. So looking at collaborative ways of supporting each other in helping them. Linda, where's your go-to?
So my go-to, like I guess everyone else in here, is Twitter, first of all. But I'd like to go back to what you were saying, Steve, about like sharing within your local community, because I first started learning from people at BET and at GES, like when BET and GES came to the UAE, and then when everything stopped, when COVID happened, I still continued learning from that same environment, but it was like outside or digitized, and it was like, well, okay, these teachers that I probably would have seen on the stage, they actually became my friends because I was actually able to have a conversation with them through digital means. And yes, we are slightly different to the schools in the UK in that there's a private element, so therefore we are in kind of there is a little bit more competition here. However, between the teachers, yeah, we're Microsoft, we're Google, we're Apple. No one should care anymore. We've got a generation of digital nomads at the moment where it doesn't matter what they're using, it's how they're using it. So therefore, my friends in Heartlands or in the schools, we can share, and that's so powerful because it's what you said, it's the same demographic across Dubai. But the ones that I've also found really useful is our local podcasts, Learn Live UAE, and the ones that are going on here, because they give a voice to teachers that won't necessarily have that voice on the big stages. So therefore, you learn a lot faster from them. That's really valuable for us at the moment. So yeah, that's where I am.
Thank you so much, Linda. Thank you. Okay, so we're down to our last question to pose before we actually look at any questions from our audience today. So Al, before we end tonight's events, can you tell us what readers can expect to take away from your book and where they can get it?
Well, I mean, where do I begin? Hopefully the most important thing is that EdTech is something for everyone involved in the education space, accessibility. I hope at points it might make people smile. I chose to try and engage with it as being something that was informative, but also slightly tongue-in-cheek every now and again as part of that journey. I think it's about identifying that there are opportunities. I love the point, albeit in the context of between schools, of not competing. I think the same mindset applies when it comes to the use of technology. The school with the most is not the best. That's not the measure. And you can have fantastic inspirational lessons with not a jot of technology in the room. It's about where it's used appropriately and effectively. And I think what I tried to share was, we often remember over history and over time the big projects that failed for one reason or another. And often behind the headlines, there's a lot more of a reason why they failed, whether it was lack of training and support or input or planning or other factors. And what I don't want to do is for people to, who are leading schools, looking to the future, to either have the bad PR or to not have their own personal reference point, to not be willing to actually engage. And it ties in with a point I made earlier, and I think it's important to clarify. It was picked up in the comments, and I think it's a really good point somebody raised. I said about, you want to know about products because you don't want to waste time and lose confidence by trying something that fails. Now, in my book, I actually referenced the fact that one of the most important things I think the last 18 months gave us was a license to take risks. But there's a difference between taking a risk and taking an informed risk. So I suppose if you can do the due diligence, you can rule out all the obvious reasons why not. You've got a much stronger likelihood that the risk you take will be positive and productive. And in that same spirit of taking risks, the idea in the book is to talk about where we've come from, what we've learned, particularly over the last few years, and what the options are moving forwards, largely around how we plan and utilize technology. So people can take risks, but informed risks where everybody's on board. It's part of the journey. And then, like everything, any organization, when you want to implement change, if people are on board, you will have a much better success rate than you will if people are dragged along or you haven't got that communication loop. And surprise, surprise, EdTech's done pretty well on enhancing communication. So it's another strand where we'd all say in any organization, we could all do better on communication, whether it's top down, bottom up, or side to side. And so I think, like all these things, you do have to look at them, as I refer to, through that wider lens, because I think they are all interconnected. But opportunities are positive, and I've also tried to highlight that money isn't the driver. It might shape the speed of the journey, but actually in some cases, it's not about spending money. It's about empowering people to use what you've got more effectively as well. Yeah. So, a sum of all those parts. What I would like to just tag on the end, and you touched on the fact that one of my sections in the book is called Voices Aligned, and that's very much the fact that, as we all know within our space, it is about that collaboration and sharing. And I'm genuinely blessed that there are so many people that were willing to give up their time and share their opinions and ideas to put into the book, in the same way as you good folks have given up your time to join us on this conversation today. And I think on both fronts. I never take that for granted. I'm really, really appreciative that you're willing to support and give up that time. But I think it says something that we need to embrace. There's been so much negativity around the pressures in education the last couple of years. We should be celebrating that there's actually something quite special at the heart of the education community, and within that, the EdTech community as well. And I think that spirit of collaboration and sharing is something that I hope kind of comes through in the book, that actually that's what we're good at, and we should celebrate it, and we should make an effort to give other people a voice. And the more voices, the stronger we are for it.
Here, and thank you so much, Al. Okay, so I've now got some of the questions that our audience have actually posed. And the first question, believe it or not, is somebody called Mark at ICT Evangelist.
I'll mute him quick.
So he says, one of my favorite parts of the book is the recurring theme of warning schools and vendors around learning from pitfalls and lesson from the past. With that in mind, do you have any sage advice, crystal ball moments that teachers at the chalk face can use? Is there anyone in our panel who'd like to respond to that particular question?
I'm looking in my eye line, I'm looking up and right. It might not be the same for everybody else, but I know Linda's shared some fab ideas in terms of the digital strategy that was planned at DERA. I don't know whether only you wanted to cherry pick from there, Linda. Put you on the spot there, haven't I?
So crystal ball moments. Yes. Okay. So the thing that I think the one that really stands out is trying to implement something too soon. And not explaining it properly. So the one that I would pick is going to sound really random, this, but is using. Sorry, I'm just trying to make it so that the chat won't. There we go. Okay. So trying to implement the styluses. So we gave. We were fortunate enough, and extremely fortunate enough, to transform our teachers' environment by giving them all Surface Pros. But these Surface Pros came with keyboards and they came with styluses. We were just like, right, guys, like we're gonna transform. This is our vision. We're gonna we're gonna empower our students by like showing them how to use hardware so that we can use the software so that we can transform the learning. Great. Touch screens were fine because everyone was okay with an iPad. Using the platforms themselves, like the Teams and Office 365, absolutely fine. We could do that. Styluses confused everyone like right from the go, and like they just didn't use them, and like we're just like, oh, like what have we done wrong? And it was because it was like people were so ingrained in using a pen and using the whiteboards and like using kind of like that. So and this is not bad as well, like because I mean like there's a big misconception that like because I'm the EdTech lead, I'm a science teacher as well, Becky. That I hate whiteboards and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, no, I don't. I'm left-handed, so like it's hard for people to read my handwriting. But the stylus was used really badly in the first 3 months or so, particularly before the use of OneNote. And I think the crystal ball moment was basically we didn't connect like what the stylus actually could do to the learning like enough or at all, basically. And we were just concentrating on how to set it up, and we made that rookie mistake. And our crystal ball, like our turning point, was actually during COVID, just after we came back. Like, so it wasn't even during the online learning time. It was just after we came back in hybrid. We suddenly realised that we could we could sit at the front of the class, facing the class. We could use the PowerPoint, like a blank PowerPoint screen, beam that PowerPoint screen onto the board behind us, and be using the whiteboard pen, the stylus, basically, and saving that PowerPoint. And it was so, in terms of what the Surface could do, it was so low tech, but it was so valuable to us, and people started using the stylus more. And started using the stylus more so that the children can actually see it. So it wasn't just like feeding back and all of that kind of stuff. Like it wasn't a one-to-one swap of a pen. It just made it better.
It's a transformation, yeah, in a way. It's enhancing it.
One other thing I'll just drop into that. Oh, sorry, is that you're going to dive in there, Caroline? No.
Oh, okay.
I was just going to add in there that one thing that I think a lot of people picked up in terms of that forward experience and crystal ball gazing was that there was a natural persuasion when looking to shape a digital strategy to put the traditional project plan timeline against it. And actually, one of the things that I think is the least helpful, on those core aspirations, back to our less is more, but actually it's not about beating yourself up about having to hit checkpoints at a certain point. It's about identifying ways to measure impact. And when you get there, you get there. And again, none of us can predict what's going to come out along the way. So I think that's another sort of strand that's been referenced a few times.
Yeah.
Can I just, I'm so sorry, because I mean, like, I've got to say this now, but because I've told this to you so many times now that I guess like I forget that we use it. But what you mentioned right at the beginning of your book, like, you like fully like say, not everyone's going to read every single chapter of your book, because that's not how it's designed, right? And we kind of designed digital strategy based on that. So another thing that we did, like, to make sure our strategy worked was to make it so that you could go backwards and forwards in the strategy depending on who you were, whether you're teacher, student, or parent. Like, if you're looking at it, it's just like, I am at the moment at this point, I know the knowledge, but I need to go forward and like build, so like I need to go forward and build my ability, if I have the knowledge, or if I like know that, for instance, that I have the ability of the school is this, for instance, we need to use Microsoft 365, but I don't have that awareness of why that needs to be used. I need to go backwards, and like, our digital strategy is really flexible because like, because we built it on this change transformation model, which I won't bore you with now, but it was really useful because it's not linear. And that's the thing, it cannot be linear, because if it is linear, then it means that like you're inflexible, and therefore change that happens. Sorry, I've got two rabbits that are staring at me.
we carried out in BISA, we did a little piece of research, and we asked to mark sort of 25 years of different research reports. And actually the thing that came back time and time again of where things had failed was where schools hadn't invested in the CPD, because it had been sort of somebody keen buying something, and they had bought as much of whatever it was as they possibly could, but actually then bringing everybody else on board hadn't happened, and it hadn't been used. So kind of the thing that came out of that was really actually make sure you can afford the CPD, whether that's time or kind of training or whatever, and even if it means buying less of what you would like to buy, to make sure you can afford the CPD so that it's used well. That's that's very much equal out.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd extend that by actually saying, because it then builds into the legacy. Often if you have, say, for example, someone leading it and you may have CPD, if they leave, it's almost as though the driver, the impetus disappears as well. But if you make it robust so it continues, I think that's what's actually going to continue. So I've got some more questions. So I'm going to just pose the next one. The next one is from Claire Archibald. I have to ask a question about data protection. She said, of course. What advice would you give to EdTech vendors about incorporating data protection principles? At what stage of the design process should this be considered? And what should EdTech vendors do to help schools comply with data protection laws? Is there anyone in our panel who'd like to respond to that? Quite a meaty question there, actually.
I can have a stab. If anybody else wants to dive in and rescue me, feel free. Obviously, the most important thing is to have good people around you. I mean, I think when we talk about data protection, and particularly it's been amplified over the last couple of years, the first thing is understanding from both sides. I kind of often say, well, we'll go to the school side and think about it from a DPIA, so you understand the right kind of questions as a data protection impact assessment that schools should be asking. I think vendors have to provide transparency on what data they're storing, where it's stored, who, if anyone, has access to it, how long that data is preserved for, having clarity on those on their policies so that they're clear and accessible. And there is an element of that, because we all learn by evolution with our technologies, that absolutely, when it comes to creating new technology, particularly more so of late, you have to design with a mindset that data has to be compartmentalized, it has to be secure, but more importantly, you have to have the right administrative procedures available to the user to allow them to clear down their data, or if there's a request for removal of an individual's data, and so on. So I think transparency is increased. We're very lucky. We've got, I think he's in the chat this evening, Tony Shepard working with us, who's great,
Hi,
great
Tony.
pool of knowledge. But I think, again, you can't, I know in the US there's been lots of challenges around that, and the number one narrative that I always see is that transparency with parents and with the the recipients of the data being clear about what information is there, why you capture it, what its purpose is, and if you follow as a vendor, how will I answer effectively the questions that will be put in a data protection impact assessment? I think you go a long way down that journey of actually being proactive in how you're presenting your solutions.
Thank you. Anyone else like to contribute, or can I move on to this? Okay, next question, again from Mark. A question my children and many children ask on a journey is, are we nearly there yet? Given the EdTech journey we've been on in recent times and working on the basis that we will never truly be there, what's next for EdTech on our journey into the future? A really good question there. Thank you, Mark, for that. Anyone who'd like to?
There's lots of enthusiasm to answer that.
I'll jump in. I'll jump in. I hate silence. It might not answer. I'll use the 1980s Nike advert of "There is no finish line." I'm a PE teacher originally, so I think that's the thing that it's not finite, and I think it's an infinite game, like a lot of learning is. And I think it's about development, and it's about continuing to see what the wins are. To celebrate the successes, but also look at what's not working. And is it the fact that it was a process or something that's been put in place? How can we iterate on that? How can we pivot and learn from what we call mistakes, but failures, and seeing that as not necessarily a naughty or a nasty word or a negative word, and see what we can actually improve. Next steps, I think, is it has to be equity of access across the globe, and that's a key fundamental. It's not just about devices, it's about access, space, it's about connectivity, all of those different things. And I think that's been brought to the forefront from a lot of schools providers weren't aware of the situation. And that's fine, because majority of the time was in a building. Actually, even if we are majority of the time back in a building, what about those students that don't have access or connectivity, that want to extend, want to celebrate, want to push on away from the four walls of a building, and are held back because of that? So I think equity of access needs to be looked at, and I think it's everybody's issue, not just a government issue. I think
that's a really good example. I mean, I'd throw a couple more in the mix on that one there, which is, I think, when we start thinking, counter to what we're having here today, I think there is a degree of a measure of success when we don't have to have these kind of very focused conversations about EdTech. It just is embedded and being used effectively in day-to-day life without needing to stand out as a separate narrative. I think if we're looking forwards, then there are so many different opportunities with technology. I do think sometimes we often hear the conversation about AI, and then this debate suddenly appears about it's going to replace teachers. Well, it may be in manufacturing, but in education, that kind of narrative is much more about there is a role with solutions, whether we want to call it AI, machine learning, in terms of how we can support personalized learning, which again can be as an add-on, as a value add, and can also help free up time for teachers to be doing that bit I alluded to in terms of the human interaction. There's not one will replace. And I really like Stephen's point about accessibility. One thing that I've talked about a couple of times, and it's certainly not my idea. I think it's Professor Rose Luckin was the first one I heard talking about it, was accessibility and tools like Siri and Alexa, and actually potentially the voice can become slightly more dominant as a means of input and acquisition of data versus the keyboard, and that levels the playing field for some. And then the other one, which I saw it flag in the chat there, and it's something that I write about quite a bit in the book, and it's something I'm quite passionate about, is for all the resources and tools we empower our young people to use to acquire knowledge, and my big one is and skills. Within that skills remit, I think we need to give them the right digital skills to challenge and to be informed, but to actually question what they see, and give them the skills that actually are the right skills that go into the workplace to make them critical thinkers. And so, the list keeps growing, and of course all these things in many cases have already been at some level interwoven into delivery from schools, but I think some things will come more to the surface as we provide more and more reliance on online tools.
Thank you so much. I've got a last question, I believe, here from Kat Couchy. And Kat, if I mispronounced your surname, apologies about that. Building on points made by Linda and Steve, how can schools learn from each other and use EdTech for sharing learning opportunities for both staff and pupils? Anyone who'd like to jump in with a response to that?
More than happy to start. I don't want to take if anybody else wants to come in. I think a level playing field of, if you've got a digital strategy, share it. If you've got any resource, share it. If you've got an idea in terms of, I've just seen student leaders, digital leaders, share it. I think we need to get over the fact that don't share it because we think we're giving away the keys to the kingdom and the students will go there or do this. FE's was a nightmare for, and it's like, if we are thinking that by sharing resources, sharing ideas, that our students will go elsewhere, then we're getting something wrong and they deserve to go elsewhere. It shouldn't be about that. It should be about a framework, so we're not wasting time. And I think we just put it out there that across UK, globally, whatever, the digital strategy and infrastructure, whatever we're trying to achieve, PD, well, whatever we put in place is then tailored and applied to the context of a different organisation. It shouldn't be that everybody's struggling and worried just because you've got the title of Director of Innovation or whatever. Share and also listen to everybody at all levels. Innovation is not one person. I've said it in the chat. Let's get rid of egos, get rid of titles, and let's really start to think about, regardless of your role, you can learn a lot from somebody else that might be a cleaner, might be something else that has a passion project. Just because they're doing that job doesn't mean that they are not and shouldn't be around that table. And I think we in education sometimes we think about structures and we need to get rid of that.
Thank you so much. Okay. Sorry, Linda? I kind of crossed you by accident.
Chamber, yes, I totally agree with you, Steve. But I've also heard it the other way as well, that we can't use something from that school because that school is it's an XYZ school, and that they're so different from us, and how could that possibly work in our school? And it's well, no, we're intelligent enough to adapt the resources to work in our schools. So yes, definitely sharing stuff. And also if you're using things like the international communities, things like Microsoft and the Google educators and the Apple teacher, Apple educators and stuff, it may seem for us, as in this group here, it may seem like a really obvious thing to go to. However, for every single teacher to be part of that international community, to know that their CPD actually means something, and it's not just something that it's something that Linda's made or it's something that Mark's made, and it's something very ad hoc. It's actually something that's concrete, and it's made by someone international outside of your school. That's really useful for teachers to kind of get into the community of learning, and the community of learning, not just about EdTech, but also just about teaching and continuing the professional development.
Okay, thank you, Linda. And Derek, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, just, I think all that is true. I certainly agree with it, but I've also seen personally and heard from other people that the education community, especially around EdTech, suffers from information overload. Not that there's too much sharing, but that if you go to some of these sharing sites or message boards, there's so much, and it's really difficult for somebody who isn't an expert to try to weed through that and parse out, well, that's duplicative of my idea, that won't work with my idea, I don't understand that idea. And almost I feel nobody or very few people have the capacity or patience to wade through that level of sharing. And so that's why Al's book is helpful, because it gives people a head start on that so that they can think through the right questions. But also there isn't, and it's sort of a wish list, which I know is impossible, but there is no sort of good housekeeping seal. Maybe that's just a US thing, but there isn't a way for people to cut out 90% of the stuff that isn't going to fit for them so they can focus on the 10% that might. I just find that maybe an impediment. That doesn't mean we shouldn't share more. Sharing is always good, always good. I just think the other side of that funnel can be very complicated for people who are trying to get information.
Thank you, Derek. I'm still
posting
through it.
Can I just come back to Derek on that? Sorry, I think he's absolutely right. I think sometimes it's especially if you're new to it, the stress of, oh my God, which one do I look at? Which one do I pick? How do I pick it? And I think the rise of real coaching in this country and globally is so important, that how can one person Doesn't have to be for cost. In organisations or across the board, some great expertise to support other people, to even just a conversation to help think about what the problems are and then start to narrow down that view of, okay, these are all the different things, but how can we support you to try things out and apply? And I think mentoring and coaching is so important, and that can happen at all levels. And I think the rise of coaching in a CPD approach is a massive thing. And again, I'll say it's sheep dip needs to get rid of. Coaching and bespoke is important. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Steve. Caroline, we are closing. We're coming to the end. Got a couple of minutes. So if you'd like to make your point, please.
Yeah, no, just very quickly. I think Mark in the chat just talking about sort of your trusted network and those trusted voices. I think that's really, really important. And also, we haven't really talked about them very much, and there aren't very many of them around anymore. But actually, you get those local authority EdTech experts and teams who can sort of help curate. There are some really, really strong individuals out there who are working with groups of schools in local authorities. So sort of finding someone near you, or regardless of whether they're near you or not, actually there are some voices. And I think it's a great idea of sharing handles and so on, and ideas of who to follow, and some good examples on that. And I'm going to go back to Tony's given a nice shout out for LearnEd, where we've had sort of speakers just talking about their own experiences as well. But I think that's really important. I'll be quiet now.
Thank you, Karen. Having attended as an attendee as well as a participant, it's very, very powerful. I will end with the last comment from Martin Bailey. In terms of an open invitation, feel free to give my school a follow at Lancashire EP, County Durham. We are always happy to share and collaborate. So at least there's one person and organisation you could all tap into. Thank you so much I think we could easily go on for another hour. And again, it's just in celebration of Al, your fantastic book. It genuinely is good. Last plug to the audience about the fact that if you do not have it, I am quite a fussy person. I'm very optimistic and positive. I'm fussy when it comes to book. This basically will cut out a lot of headaches. If you're looking for somewhere to start, no matter where you are, classroom teacher, senior leader, different stakeholders, this is the book. This is a great start. Thank you to our audience for joining us. Thank you again to our panel for a really interesting discussion, and love the different perspectives that are actually shared. Yes, take care everyone, and have a good evening. Bye then.